Hello, 6th graders. Welcome to Big Ideas Math, 7th grade math, section 3.5, solving two-step equations lesson. Pause while you write the lesson number and title in your math notebook. Pause again while you write today's lesson objective in your math notebook. Today's objective is students will solve equations by undoing the operations in the reverse order of how the expression would have been evaluated. Today we'll be starting with example 1, solving a two-step equation. Solve negative 3x plus 5 equals 2. As always, we write the equation first, and then we're going to use our subtraction property of equality. So we subtract the 5 from both sides, and then we simplify, and then we use our division property of equality, and then we simplify, and we end up with a solution of x equals 1. We always check our work by taking our solution and putting it back into the equation and seeing if we get something that is true. So when you are doing this, you need to remember, if you have a 2 or a 3-step problem, that what you do is you use PEMDAS backwards. So it becomes SADMEP. So be sure you're doing that and you'll have no trouble with these. Starting on the on your own problems, number 1. So it is 2x plus 12 equals 4, so we write the equation. And we start by subtracting first, because that in our new world is going to come before multiplication. So we subtract that from both sides, and we end up with 2x on the left equals 4 minus 12 equals negative 8. And then we're going to divide both sides by 2, and that leaves us with an x on the left equals negative 4. For number 2, we do negative 5c plus 9 equals negative 16. And we are going to subtract the 9 from both sides first, and that leaves us with negative 5c on the left and negative 25 on the right, and then we divide both sides by negative 5, and that leaves us with a c on the left equals a positive 5 on the right. And then for number 3, we do have to resolve that using the distributive property first. So we have 3x minus 12 equals 9. And then we add 12 to both sides, and that gives us 3x equals 21. And then we divide both sides by 3, and that leaves us with x equals 7. Now we're going to do example 2, solving a two-step equation. Let's start by taking a look at the study tip, because those are always good. It says you can simplify the equation in example 2 before solving. Multiply each side by the least common denominator of the fractions, 8. So x over 8 minus 1/2 equals negative 7/2, x minus 4 equals negative 28, and x equals negative 24. So we'll keep that in mind as we go through this. And our directions are solve x over 8 minus 1/2 equals negative 7/2. So we write the equation, and then we're using the addition property of equality. So we're adding 1/2 to both sides. So this is the same thing we were doing, it just has fractions. It's no big deal. You all know how to add and subtract fractions. So we add 1/2 to both sides. So negative 7/2 plus 1/2 equals negative 3. And then we are multiplying both sides by 8. because that x is divided by 8. So we multiply both sides by 8, and we end up with x on the left and negative 24 on the right. So the solution is x equals negative 24. Remember, you can always check your solution by putting it back into the equation and seeing if you come out with something that's equivalent. Now let's move on to the second set of on your own problems, remembering to write these in your notebook. Number 4, m divided by 2 plus 6 equals 10. So we're going to start with the subtraction, and that leaves us with m divided by 2 equals 4, and then we are going to multiply both sides by 2, and that leaves us with m equals 8. And then for number 5, we have negative z over 3 plus 5 equals 9. So again, we're going to start with the subtraction. So we're going to subtract 5 from both sides, and that leaves us with negative z over 3 equals 4. So then we need to multiply both sides, and I want to be sure I multiply out that, I want to get rid of that negative, so I don't want to end up with a negative z, so I'm going to multiply this by a negative 3. So I want to multiply the other side by a negative 3 because I have to do the same thing to both sides, so I end up with a positive z over here equals a negative 12. And for number 6, I have 2/5 plus 4a equals negative 6/5. Now we want to subtract 2/5 from both sides. So we end up with 4a on the left equals negative 8/5 on the right. So the next part is a little bit tricky, but it's not too terrible. We're dividing both sides by 4. So remember, when you divide, another way to think of that is multiplying by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 4 is 1/4. So we're multiplying on the right by 1/4. So on the left we end up with a, and on the right we end up with negative 8 over 20. And when we simplify that, 2 goes into the top 4 times, and it goes into the bottom 10 times. Oh, and then we can keep going. 2 goes into the top 2 times, and it goes into the bottom 5 times. So we end up with a equal to negative 2/5. Example 3 has us combining like terms before we solve, and that's always a great thing to do because it makes our life so much easier. So 3y minus 8y equals 25, so we combine our like terms. So we have negative 5y equals 25, and y equals negative 5. And so our solution is y equals negative 5. So example 4 is the real-life application. The height at the top of a roller coaster hill is 10 times the height h of the starting point. The height decreases 100 feet from the top to the bottom of the hill. The height at the bottom of the hill is negative 10 feet. Our job is to find h. So they have put all of this information in this table for you. And so here's what we're doing. The height at the bottom of the hill is negative 10 feet. We're solving 10h minus 100 equals negative 10 to find h. So here's our equation. and we add 100 to each side to get that 10h by itself, and then to get the h all by itself, we divide each side by 10. So the height at the start is 9 feet. So now we're going to continue the on your own problems. Number 7 is 4 minus 2y plus 3 equals negative 9. So we need to combine our terms. 4 plus 3 equals 7. So 7 minus 2y equals negative 9. And then we want to subtract 7 from both sides. So we end up with negative 2y equals negative 16. And that leaves us dividing both sides by negative 2. And that leaves a y on the left equals a positive 8 on the right. And then for number 8, we have 7x minus 10x equals 15. And we need to combine our terms, so that leaves us with a negative 3x equals 15. And then we want to not subtract, we want to divide both sides by negative 3. And so that leaves us with an x on the left equals negative 5. And then for number 9, we have negative 8 equals 1.3 m minus 2.1 m. And we combine our terms, and we have negative 8 equals negative 0.8 m. And when we divide both sides by negative 0.8, we end up with a positive 10 on the left equals m. For number 10, we are doing the same thing we did in the example, except the bottom of the hill is now negative 5 feet. So we're going to rewrite the problem, the equation, and it's 10h minus 100 equals, and now instead of negative 10 feet, we're going to write negative 5. So we add 100 to both sides, and now we have 10h on the left equals 95 on the right, and then we divide both sides by 10, and we end up with h on the left equals 9.5. So our height is 9.5 feet. As always, to complete your flipped lesson, you need to be prepared with your notes, vocabulary, and other work from your lesson completed, and be prepared with any questions you might have, and have a good attitude.